Well, how do we assess the impact of this? What does it tell us about the union movement and perhaps the relative power position of unions and workers? Our politics editor, Lukhanyo Calata, joins you now. Lukhanyo, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, Stephen.
There used to be a big fight about turnout in these things. The unions would say they would give us a very high number, police would try and give us a relatively neutral number, and government would give us a low number. What's happening here?
Well, what we're seeing is all of the unions giving us a low number themselves, which means that the government no longer has to give us a low number, or the cops give us a medium number. The unions themselves giving us a low number means that the support that came out today was not as much as what they had expected. And that's a dangerous place for unions to be in, because remember, the power that unions have is that ability to tell government, to say, we will withhold our labor should you not grant X, Y, and Z. Now, the unions have done so. They said, we will withhold labor, right? But the country continued relatively unscathed from today's national shutdown. So now, government and the governing party can now look at COSATU and say, oh, well, if you withhold your labor, that's fine. Everything is going to continue as it should.
So, I mean, this comes during a public service bargaining council discussions around wages for civil servants. Could this have turned out to just be the wrong negotiating move? In other words, COSATU's displayed its hand and it's weak.
Yeah, which means that the 2% that the government has put on the table, you know what I mean? Government could just say, well, it's 2% and nothing more. What can unions then do over and above that? It's either they accept the 2% or they walk away with nothing from the table. Stephen, for me, the greatest concern from today and these low turnout for the national shutdown is the fact that the left of the political spectrum, which is usually the custodian of workers' interests, that has been significantly weakened, and that's a dangerous, dangerous place for our country to be.
We can look in so many ways as to why this has happened. We can look at the tripartite alliance and the decision made in the early 1990s by COSATU then to join it. I would imagine another key moment probably was the expulsion of NUMSA and the expulsion of Zwelinzima Vavi, and I name him specifically, and the formation then of SAFTU and NUMSA going outside. And everything that happened there, that led to this division and the end of one industry, one union.
Pretty much so. I mean, Vavi has tried to be part of or set up something similar that could rival COSATU, and maybe within that rivalry, regenerate a lot of energy within the labor union sector. But unfortunately, it doesn't seem to be the case. I think what we've seen today, that COSATU now had to join forces. And even with the two of them joining forces, what we're seeing is that the numbers that they were able to get, the boots that they were able to get onto the streets won't be giving the ANC sleepless nights, basically. And as again, I'm saying, that does not bode well for the left in this country, because now we have got a very dominant right-wing sector. I think that, I won't mention any names, but I think the right-wing or the right in the country is gaining prominence, and without the left to be able to balance that rhetoric and to be able to just balance the politics is going to be very, very dangerous. And as a country, with a weakened left, with a weakened labor union, and it's going to be very, very difficult for our country in 10 years from now to sit, for us to be able to balance the books and the politics.
There were warnings at the start of the pandemic that people with capital going into the pandemic would come out of it in a much stronger position than they were relative to everybody else. So if you owned 2 houses before the start of the election, you may come out, before the start of the pandemic, you may come out of it with 3. If you're a big company that owns 2 or 3 other companies, you may come out of it owning 4 because of what happens. And it seems to me that one of the consequences of this, to build on your point, is that the position of workers vis-a-vis in relation to the position of bosses has grown fundamentally weaker. I don't know if there's much the unions in this country or any other country could have done anything about it, but it seems to me that workers, whether they're in government or in the private sector, and normally private sector unions are more left-wing, are actually in a much weaker position than they were 5 years ago, and not only because of their own missteps.
No, you're right. But also COVID, and you were pointing it out, COVID hastened that process because remember, we lost a lot of jobs all around the world due to the pandemic. So when restrictions were lifted and all of those kinds of things, people were able to, companies were able to start employing again. So people went to work. But, 6 months in, do you really want to strike? Do you really want to not be at work? When you know that, firstly, it's a no work, no pay policy. And secondly, if you're not at work, there's a risk that someone else could replace you. So when you come back on Thursday, you'll find that, oops, that position has now been closed, or that position, your position within the company has been weakened. So even though the numbers came out yesterday and they said, well, the unemployment has dropped a little bit because people are back at work, it's still too early for people to be staying away and going on a strike because of the real risk of them being laid off. So nobody wants to be without a job, and literally we're just slowly recovering from the pandemic.
Lukhanyo Calata, thank you so much, our politics editor. So much to look at when you look at the issue around power relationships in our country. In a moment.